First of six class sessions that are on the broad topic of fundraising and Reconstructionist congregations. My name is Rabbi Maurice Harris. I've interacted with many of you in different roles over the years, but some of you may be meeting me for the first time. And same for me. Um, this is going to be a a series of Zoom meetings in which I'll always be doing some slideshow presenting. But what I've tried to do is um, design the slideshows so that they run between 25 to 35 minutes max, and that there's room for some questions or conversation. With a group this big, um, if it seems like breakout groups will be useful for some of the future classes, then I'll build that into the preparation. But tonight, I'm not doing any breakout groups. Um, Tonight might be a bit more um, of a frontal presentation style than and more of a mix in the future sessions. So, having said all of that, we've got 27 folks here. I want to invite people to use the chat function tonight and also to use the hand raising function that is part of Zoom. Um, and I will do my best to try to look for raised hands. And if I can stop, if I'm presenting, but there's a raised hand, if I can stop, I will. I would. I mean, of course, I can stop. I'll choose to stop if it seems like it's not going to derail um, the bigger objective of making sure we cover um, two topics tonight. I really want to make sure that we do that to kind of get launched and get into some of this material. So, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to do it in a way that hopefully has a little me in the lower left-hand corner. And I appreciate folks who are already making a point of using the chat. Um, Actually, before I dive into this slideshow, I want to take one quick step back because I am noticing that the director of our department is here. So I want to pause for a moment and ask if Justin Rosensmollen would be willing to just say a brief word to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Erev Tov. Good evening. I'm Justin Rosensmollen. I'm Vice President for Thriving Communities and Partnerships here at Reconstructing Judaism. It's really nice to see some familiar names and faces in my gallery feed, but actually lots of new names and faces for me here in my role, and that is absolutely awesome. I have the distinct privilege of leading our 6-person strong, actually 7-person strong, Thriving Communities team, and working really closely with our dear colleague, Rabbi Maurice Harris, who has been working since the spring to create a new fundraising guide informed by Reconstructionist values and approaches, and bringing to you sort of best practices from across the nonprofit space, religious congregations, and more, sort of combined with his own flair and ingenuity. And it's been such a blessing for me to learn with Maurice as part of his preparations, and then to turn this guide into this 6-part series. So all of you can take these tools and practices and bring them back to your communities to make them even financially stronger, and in turn, use those resources to make them even more vibrant, inclusive, creative spaces for Jewish living and Jewish learning and Jewish ritual. And so that is a privilege for me to play my part in this and to get to learn with Maurice, and know you will enjoy doing that as well. And I also want to thank each and every one of you committing to 6 sessions. I know it's winter time, it's cold, and for some of us like me in the Northeast, but maybe some of you are in some warmer places. I see some of the places around some of the congregations around around the screen. But even so, to take this time out of your busy schedules and share your time with us and for your congregations to financially support your participation, we absolutely do. We are so honored that you all thought that this was worthwhile. And I want to thank you for that time and that investment in us, but I also want to thank you for being part of an experiment with us. I've been listening really carefully to the feedback I'm getting from congregational leaders throughout my travels. And also in our recent Thriving Communities survey, we'll be able to share results with you beginning later on this month. And Maurice's course is an example of us continuing to learn from you, iterate, and really level up in how we are providing resources to help you all in your roles and in your communities thrive. And so we plan to learn from this course. It's an experiment, it's a lab for us, and to offer others in the very near future based on what we learn here. So I just want to thank you all for being part of that experiment with us, for trusting us, and we can't wait to learn with you. And Maurice, once again, thank you and call Kabod.
Thank you. Thank you. So, all right. And I appreciate that Justin's words also kind of offered a little bit of a big picture of the way in which these class sessions are linked to this resource that we are getting close to being able to launch formally on its own password protected hub on our website, and which you all will get access to a very user friendly version of, even though it's not the final website version, during the course of this class, during the course of these sessions. So let me jump back to where we were and share my screen again. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually presenting um, a slideshow that is based on a section, a chapter actually, of this guide. And that chapter is going to be our first focus, and it is called Taking Inventory. But before that, what I actually want to do is say a brief word about the guide as a resource that will be available to you and that I really hope will be a set of um, documents that can be updated from time to time as best practices and excellent suggestions for modifying the resource arrive from the grassroots over time. But what this guide is going to be when it's initially presented is it's got 20 chapters, and those 20 chapters fit into 5 sections. So what you're seeing in this column on the left are the 5 major sections of this guide. And now I'm going to break one of the rules of good Zoom presentation and flood you with text. Don't worry about that. You're going to have plenty of access to documents that show all 20 chapters laid out in front of you for your consideration. Um, so if you didn't run away screaming and having all of this text come at you, I'm not going to read all of this off the slide. I'm going to let this linger for maybe a full minute and just give you a chance to see what the chapters are that are in each one of these sections. What I really want to call attention to is section 2, core practices for a thriving fundraising culture. In many ways, section 2 is kind of the guts of this resource. There are 7 chapters on very specific areas of fundraising. And each one of those chapters contains step-by-step instructions for how to go from we don't do this to, okay, we figured out how many people we need to do this, and here are the steps we would need to take to do a version of it. And then, depending on the kind of sophisticated level that you're able to do any one of these types of fundraising at, given your resources and number of people, you'll have options in terms of, small, medium, large, in terms of what you're doing with any one of these. And you can see that some of the other sections um, offer topics that either allow you to step back and do some study or to do some important internal inventorying so that you can go at fundraising coming from a more grounded place, grounded in your mission and values. In fact, that's one of the chapters we're about to do a little dive into. And then the other one that we're going to tackle tonight is is section 3. So the is chapter 3. So you'll see these are two of the chapters that are all um, if folks could just mute themselves, please. Or if I need to, I will. Um, I appreciate that. Um, uh, So we'll move, as I said, we'll dive into these two that are part of the values, vision, and readiness section. And as we're making our way there, I'm going to try to solve our person needs to mute. I think I solved it. Okay. So I want to start by saying taking inventory, which is what this chapter is called. Um, it's really about clarity. And when fundraising feels scattered or exhausting or too ad hoc in our congregations, this often happens because the congregation has kind of lost sight of its center. But if you can engage in some inventorying activities, then you can reroute yourselves in your identity. And you can try to set it up so that your congregation's fundraising efforts will grow out of your genuine character and your sense of purpose. And as you start to do that, fundraising starts to feel energizing. It starts to feel more like an extension of your mission and even a sacred act. You won't just be asking for money. You'll be inviting people to participate in something that matters. All of that, I'm sure, sounds very lovely and abstract for the moment. That's okay. We're gonna make things more concrete. So, to get to that more grounded place that I was just talking about, we are going to focus on three things. Your context, which is who your congregation is and where you're rooted. Your core competencies, these are the things that you already do best. And your calling, the particular ways that your congregation can serve your community. And by your community, I'm including your own members and your general local community. So let's talk about your congregation forming a group to do the work that I'm about to describe. Because one of the questions is who's gonna work on this? Um, So, a group that is going to do the work of assessing and inventorying your congregation's context, core competencies, and calling. If you have a fundraising committee or a finance committee, they can work through the steps that I'm going to be presenting. However, we recommend that your fundraising committee or finance committee invite some more people who aren't on the committee to join in this process. What you want is a small group of leaders and volunteers who represent at least some of the diversity within your congregation and who are interested in thinking together about fundraising. That's who should go through these steps together. If you don't have a fundraising or finance committee, that's okay. You can bring together a diverse ad hoc group of people to do this work. Okay, so let's begin with context. Your context is everything that surrounds and defines your congregation, both inside your walls and beyond them. It includes people, physical space, neighbors, and geography and culture where you live. As I go through these next slides about context, try to imagine being part of a small group in your congregation that has come together to create your own mapping of the various elements of your context. How you do this mapping is flexible, and you don't have to produce some kind of perfect result. You'll probably end up thinking of things to add to any map you create of your context later on. And that's okay too. Now, first, let's consider the people in your congregation as part of your context. We can think about this in terms of the networks that make up a synagogue's human community. Every congregation is a collection of overlapping circles. Actually, if I could design this slide a little differently, I would try to have all the circles better overlap with one another and not just be stuck on either side of the ones in the middle. But you could help me out by using your imagination. Um, the circles that are colored in the middle, they're meant to represent some of the obvious um, uh, overlapping circles. They're meant to represent some of the obvious visible subgroups within a congregation. I'm not saying all of your congregations have Shabbat regulars, religious school families, and seniors as your three most visible subgroups. I'm just saying these are three frequently occurring ones. And then in the various circles that are not colored in, that's meant to represent that every synagogue also has quieter groups. Or groups that are not as immediately visible to, let's say, anyone who might be on a committee or on the board trying to think about who's who in your congregation. So, in a lot of our congregations, this may include groups like caregivers who are supporting loved ones, members who love to hike together, LGBTQ plus families, Jews in 12-step recovery, young adults looking for connection, elders who maybe can't get to services but still are deeply interested in being a part of the congregation. And we could add many, many more. The idea is mapping your internal context is a chance to try to pay attention to all of these circles and not just to, fill out a giant piece of poster board with, 100 of these different circles, but also to ask yourself some questions about how the people in these different subgroups are doing. Who's thriving? Who's very essential to the congregation kind of having its unique signature sense of personality? Who's essential to that but is not so visible? Um, who are people in your congregation who have human needs that are not getting met all that well? Um, seeing your people as clearly as possible helps you identify both strengths and opportunity for deeper care, and it can also spark ideas for engagement and fundraising that you hadn't considered before. So now I want to pause for a moment and ask if people could use the chat. And I invite you to write in the chat a subgroup that you can think of within your congregation that may not be among the most visible. I'll actually stop the screen sharing for a moment. see what we got here. People who don't have kids, under 30s, Yiddish speakers, and Yiddish interested people. Okay. Um, Got a couple more new ones. Politically active people, a group of bike riders every weekend, musicians. We have lots. Yes, I know CBH, Beethoven Atlanta. We know all about your amazing musicians. Um, Okay, remote attendees. Thank you. That issue's been coming up lately a bunch of times. People who are homebound, teens. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Congregants who are differently abled or chemically sensitive. Yes, yes. Issue that is growing in importance and in the number of places where we know where we sometimes get calls to try to be a thought partner about ways to try to approach those issues. Post B'nai Mitzvah families. Thank you. This is great. Um, all right, let's jump back. Woohoo. All right, so your context also includes where you are physically, your building, any additional locations where you sometimes meet, and your neighborhood and your surroundings. So first, I just want to invite you to think about your space, the physical collection of spaces where you gather. It doesn't matter whether this is a building you own or a place where you rent space. Maybe you have a sunlit garden that could host concerts or Havdalah gatherings. Maybe your kitchen could become a hub for cooking classes. Maybe your classrooms could support after-school tutoring or adult learning. Which of your spaces have the brightest light? Which of your spaces have the best temperature control? What are the acoustics like in your various spaces? Is there outdoor space, even if it's only a parking lot? Are there spaces that could be used in new ways if they just received some repair or modest upgrading? So after spending some time doing an inventory of your physical spaces, then the assignment moves to looking outward. Another part of your context is the community you're a part of, including the immediate neighborhood where you meet. Who are your neighbors? Schools, nonprofits, small businesses, cafes, restaurants, cultural institutions, other faith communities. Mapping those relationships can reveal new ways to collaborate and serve. Fundraising opportunities can emerge right where partnerships or collaborations happen. So, as I've been saying, you've got a small group. Maybe it's your finance committee plus a few extra people. Maybe it's an entirely ad hoc group. Um, and you've done some work together on inventorying the people and your places where you gather and the town or the neighborhood that you're a part of. And so now you're ready to move on from context to core competencies. And core competencies are things that your community does beautifully and consistently. Your core competencies, in a way, are your superpowers. They're the talents and skills, the patterns of excellence that already exist in your congregation. So some of these strengths are going to be really easy to name. A talented choir, I'm looking at you, Beit Haverim, but not only at you. A vibrant teen program, a rabbi who leads wonderful services, a well-organized visiting the sick, Bikur Cholim committee, right? So some of your core competencies, almost anybody who's spent more than a day in your congregation could probably name at least one of them. Some of the others that you have might be more subtle, right? like a culture of showing up for one another in times of need, or the ability to create events that consistently feel warm and inclusive, like to a surprising degree. Like even when everything else has kind of gone sideways, we're still good at that. Some synagogues have core competencies that they take for granted. They may even need an outsider to point them out to them. For example, if your congregation has a board that almost never has toxic personality issues, creating dramas that distract from its purpose, then believe it or not, you have a core competency. Even if that board struggles to get some things done and needs to do more to get everyone on it to be more active, the fact that your congregation has a functional board with a culture of common courtesy and goodwill, that is a superpower. That should not be taken for granted. And it didn't just happen by accident. There are things people before and the present time are doing that makes that happen. And that is a truly crucial strength. A lot of synagogues don't have it. As you think about what all of your core competencies are, take the time to list some of the great talents, not just that exist within groups in your congregation, but that individual members have, especially if those members have been willing to share those talents with the congregation or in service of the congregation. You might, in doing this exercise, create a talent map that just tries to surface all of the human gifts that are already present in your congregation. After you've mapped what people are really good at in your congregation, then it's a good idea to go through this inventorying of core competencies a second time. Only this time, don't list what people are good at. Instead, only list what people love to do. This includes groups within the congregation as well as individuals. What do people love to do? Just start with what you all know. You could also ask people directly and learn more. But probably, if you have a reasonably diverse cross section of a group doing this work together, they could name what a bunch of different people love to do. Why is that worth inventorying? Because a lot of the most successful fundraisers are ones that tap into joy. When a project connects with people's strengths and their joy, it stops feeling like work and it starts feeling like celebration. All of the activities I'm describing are discussed in the chapter of the fundraising guide on this topic. And there's a worksheet that's included with the chapter as a separate document that you can download, that you can also modify, but that you could print out and use. In case you weren't 100% sure, the images on this particular slide are meant to represent, I think, the super obvious different kinds of talents and super strengths that might be present in congregations. The reason there's a toolbox in the middle is there to remind us that taken all together, the competencies of our congregation can serve as tools to support our fundraising plans. We're going to start to see more and more how that is true as we move forward. But now we arrive at what might be the most counterintuitive part of this process, taking an inventory of your congregation's calling. Now, I'm defining calling in a very particular way. And I want to say, actually, this framework that includes this inventorying and this mapping out calling, these are things that I learned studying Christian sources, studying how churches approach fundraising. And these are some of the best ideas that I felt I encountered in the course of learning a lot from churches and different denominational groups. So, in this framework, your synagogue's calling is the meeting point between your core competencies, your strengths, and the needs within your membership and in the local community around you. Okay? It's the various ways that your community is well built to show up for people in the current moment. Ask yourselves, what unmet needs exist among our members? What about in our local community? Who is struggling and underserved? What could we offer that no one else quite can through our space or our skills or our creative initiative? Sometimes your calling reveals itself through simple, tangible acts. Maybe you realize you have a lot of adult members who are struggling to provide care for aging parents and adolescent kids at the same time. And so you hold an exploratory meeting that leads to the formation of a support group. Maybe you open your doors for grief support circles that are available to folks in the general community. Maybe you partner with a nearby school for after school programs. Maybe you host rehearsals for a youth choir or collaborate with another faith community on the climate crisis or on humane and fair immigration policies. Again, your calling emerges from the place where your competencies, your strengths, meet needs that are unmet among your members and in your local community. As you work together to identify possible areas in which your synagogue could act to fulfill your calling, keep in mind that you do not need to try to meet all the possible needs that you come up with in this exercise. You may end up deciding to focus on just one or none. You may just end up sharing your ideas about what you think your congregation's calling looks like with your board, or maybe through a newsletter article with your entire congregation, and let others be inspired to act as they're so moved on that information. But please don't skip this part of the inventorying of your congregation. Understanding your congregation's calling. In fact, going with the theory that your congregation does have a calling, it's rooted in its mission statement, but it's also rooted in what it's good at doing and what needs exist in the moment now that you could possibly help meet. Um, if you can buy in to that idea and then take the time to understand what your congregation's calling looks like, that will become a powerful and often underutilized piece of your fundraising strategy. When you lean into your unique capacities for doing good, you generate stories worth telling. You generate purpose worth supporting. You're going to be asking people to support your synagogue. What is worth supporting? What stories can you generate that are worth telling? The mitzvot that you do become the proof points for why your community matters and why people should give to support it. As you go through this process, you'll also become freshly inspired yourselves about why your congregation exists. Why does a congregation exist? It exists to be a blessing. That's why synagogues exist. Okay. I want to invite you to take a moment and just to think of a time that your synagogue made a real difference. For its own members, for people in the general community, it doesn't matter. What strengths were at play? Who benefited? And I just invite you to take like 30 seconds of me being quiet and just to kind of think about that in your imagination. Now I want to ask if just two people would be willing to share theirs. So if you could use the raise hand function, that would be great. I'm sorry to limit it to two. A time your synagogue made a real difference. I'm surprised to have stumped the group. Yeah, Sherry.
After the October 7th attack, um, congregation Ner Shalom and Katati basically opened up to be a place where people could be heard and listened to respectfully. Um, and that was incredibly, incredibly moving for a whole lot of people and also set the trajectory for us for how we were going to hold things moving forward. But the stated um, goal of a few events immediately thereafter was just listen, listen respectfully, listen respectfully, listen. And that made a difference.
That's fantastic. And I want to say something, and I'm sort of stealing from session two, which is all about storytelling. But thank you, Sherry. And what Sherry just shared is a story. A story in fundraising doesn't need to be long. It can actually be two or three sentences. And so I'm imagining, and maybe you've already done this because you guys are doing some amazing stuff with fundraising outreach. By the way, I love getting all of your newsletters, and I read a lot of them. Um, um, but basically, if if you had one or two people in at Ner Shalom who were asked and were willing to say on in their own name, this is how I was feeling um, in the weeks after October 7th. This is what was hard, and I was scared to go, but I went, and it helped. And if somebody else says that as well, that then you've got two short quotes, and then whoever is telling this story says, this is the kind of thing that we are good at. We are good at handling crisis by leaning back on our core values and our deepest Jewish teachings. We're ably led by Rabbi Irwin in this endeavor, and um, this is worth supporting. This is what we're all about. Help us keep doing this. Next year, next year we're planning to try something different with community circles of gathering for talking about, challenging issues facing all of us. Like, that's the kind of building blocks that make a good story, and a story that can be authentic and real and motivating when you're asking people to give. Okay, did anybody else have an example of something that happened in your synagogue where it made a difference? I find it impossible to believe there aren't. Anybody who's willing to hit their raise hand feature, or if I can see you, I may not be able to see you because you're on two different screens. Aha. Well, John Carroll, are you pointing to someone else? Whoever you're pointing to probably isn't the person I'm seeing.
Scott had his hand up.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah.
Scott.
Thank you, John.
Scott, where are you from? What congregation?
Congregation Beit Havorim in Atlanta,
Thank you.
Georgia.
Okay, it's all you.
And yeah, thanks. The story I was going to tell was our congregation, in addition to, as was pointed out earlier, having a lot of musicians, and we do use music for a lot of our points of connection with the rest of the community. We're also we started as the gay and lesbian congregation in Atlanta 40 years ago, and we have a large number of people from that community in our congregation right now, including a lot of people, families with trans kids. And as we all know, probably in every state of the union, but certainly in Georgia, trans kids are have a little bit of a target on their back. We do an annual, Trans Day of Remembrance Shabbat. We just did one last month in partnership with Sojourn, which is a advocacy organization that also came from our synagogue originally. And that has been an excellent point of contact and connection for a lot of different organizations in the city who want to sort of get together and advocate for trans rights and trans children and trans support in the community. And everyone kind of knows that Beit Havarim now is a good place for that, and a place for resources, and a place to get you connected with the right things. So I feel we make a real difference in that regard.
I I can, and I'm first of all, I'm really moved by that. Um, uh, we had an amazing staff member on our team um, who is um, who's a trans person and married with kiddos, and got a job opportunity in London and took it um, for many overdetermined reasons, but one among them was this is too scary now here.
We hear that a lot, by the way.
Um, I see your hand, Diana. Unfortunately, I'm realizing that I need to press on, but I do want to say, Scott, there was a thing I heard as you were telling that story, and I could imagine several versions of that story, short enough to be on a social media post, long enough to be an email, and then long enough to be actually like a 2-minute talk that someone's giving from the Bima to point people to whatever campaign you might be running. But at some point, you said something like, um, people know now that CBH is a good place to be. That just sounds like a single line encapsulation that could really put an exclamation point on um, the case that you're making. Um, People know that it's a good place to be. It has been a place of refuge before, and it is again in a powerful way that we wish was not being foisted upon us by these times. But this is a piece of who we are and what we're all about. Help us make this stronger. We have accomplished this together. Help us make this stronger. I'm doing too much of session 2. I'm going back to wrap up this slideshow. Okay, moving along. So once you've explored your context and your competencies and your calling, you can use what you've learned to help shape some of your fundraising goals for the next year. You can actually try to design a campaign or an event that makes sense or is inspired by your deepened understanding of who you are and how you serve, right? A synagogue, for example, with a thriving music program might host a benefit concert that supports local schools or youth programs. A community known for its hospitality might organize a food festival or shared meal that brings neighbors together. A congregation called to interfaith hospitality might raise funds through collaborative learning events with other faith communities. So those examples that I just offered are ideas that aren't so much right about a synagogue raising money for itself. But if those are the kinds of ideas that paying attention to your context, competencies, and calling lead you to, and you decide to enact some of them, you are still doing fundraising. You're just doing a different part of the process of fundraising. You are creating meaningful stories through your acts of service that are creative, that are mission aligned, and that build community. Especially if they involve, a partner in your local community. So you're literally creating the stories and the experiences that you will point to as your successes, and that are part of why it's meaningful for people to give. You're also creating stories that have integrity behind them, um, that stand out from sort of fluff content that might be very generic, as you're asking people to consider making a gift. When donors sense the integrity behind your efforts, behind what you've been doing, and more of it that you want to do, and you say that, it has a certain force of gravity to it. A lot of people want to be a part of that story. We know that they partly feel that way because they've already become a part of your congregation. All right. Last point on this slide. You do not have to derive all of your fundraising projects, initiatives, or campaigns from this approach I've been discussing, this centering your context and your competencies and your calling approach. I'm not suggesting that. I am suggesting that you put together a group, a representative group of your members, and go through this process, and see where it leads. What possibilities does it stir into awareness? How does it potentially help you think of what might be, if not a fundraising campaign of a particular type, it might help you think about stories that you want to tell as part of a fundraising campaign that you already know you're going to do, like an annual campaign built around the High Holy Day season, if that's something that you do. This exercise can help you rethink what the stories are, and the exciting opportunity to be a part of something good that has a future, what that all looks like in relation to maybe a campaign that you already do and are kind of used to doing the same way every year. So, one slide on telling your story. Some of what you might end up doing as a result of having done this thorough self-examination is coming up with new stories that talk about the best of what your congregation has been, is, and could be. Boy, if only I had read that from my script, I would not have spent 2 minutes saying that in other words just now. When we meet for the second class in this series, we're going to spend the entire time focusing only on stories. For now, let's talk briefly about one particular kind of story. Every congregation needs a core story, like a 2-minute version, a 1-minute version, a 30-second version of what we'll call your core story. Your core story captures the heart of who you are and why you matter. It should not sound like a grant application. It is not a list of programs. It should express pride and gratitude, and gratitude for what you have done together, and anticipation and enthusiasm about what you can do next. So a really good core story simply tells, here's who we are, here's what we do best, and here's how we want to serve our community going forward. That's it. It's simple, it's honest, and it's human. And if a lot of people in your congregation can tell that story, like start with your board and your clergy and your core volunteers, and staff. But if more and more people can tell that story, you'll find that people listen differently. They will feel your purpose before you even ask them for support. Okay, I'm going to close this particular slideshow. Taking inventory of your context, competencies, and calling isn't just about planning. It's about grounding the more practical work you do on fundraising in a kind of spiritual intention. When we pause to reflect on our context, our core competencies, and our calling, we remember that fundraising isn't just about sustaining an institution. It's about sustaining a mission, your congregation's mission. So as you continue your fundraising journey, keep these steps close, map your people and the various networks and subgroups within your congregation. Celebrate your strengths and superpowers. Clarify how you can serve your members better and your neighbors. And tell your core story with honesty and warmth. Those are some of the things that come from this particular kind of preliminary approach towards working on fundraising. So I want to stop there. I want to note the time. I see that we're at 5 minutes to 9, and this goes until 9:30. The second slideshow is shorter, so I'm happy to field a question or two. I see there is a hand up, although I'm not sure whose hand it is because I'm still getting better at Zoom management. You can also just unmute. Is it Jane or one of the?
It's Andrew Robbins, but when
Yes.
someone raises a hand, it ought to go to the top left of your screen
Yeah.
if you're looking at the matrix view.
That is what I'm looking at, and I am used to that happening. So I haven't actually seen that, but I thought I saw indication elsewhere. But let's not get stuck on that for the moment. If somebody has a question or a comment, please share it. Happy to field it.
Do
Okay.
you ever think of
Yes.
a subset of a congregation as well as the whole? So, for example, I think we, like many congregations, uh, fund the school, the religious school, to a great degree. And should you think about the fundraising just for the school as well as the whole entity?
That's a great question. And I mean, the short answer is yes, it's important to identify major um, subgroups or major subordinate systems that are within the larger system, and to recognize when common sense dictates that it's important for there to be some fundraising that, let's say, the religious schools committee and staff are committed to doing for the school, right? That becomes its own little sort of closed um, system. But it's also true for the vast majority of our synagogues that have a religious school that general membership is subsidizing some significant fraction of the cost of the religious school. And so that means that getting really good at telling authentic impact stories and getting really good at people themselves who experienced those positive impacts being asked to tell some of those stories for the purpose of fill in the blank fundraising campaign that you are doing. That also becomes imperative. So both things are true, and communication is important so that a campaign that is self-contained within the school doesn't work at cross purposes with other fundraising priorities for the board and the congregation as a whole. Thank you. Awesome question. I'm gonna jump into the next slideshow. So I'm gonna share my screen again. I'm gonna escape out of the slideshow presentation. There we go. I'm gonna move this item out of the way. Okay, are you now seeing a who's in charge of fundraising slide? Somebody just say yes. Thank you. Awesome. So I just shared with you this, preliminary pre-fundraising exercise, and I talked a little bit about who are the people that could come together and be the group that would go through that exercise. Now I want to talk about the question of who's going to be in charge or who is in charge of fundraising in your congregation more broadly, right? Because this is a question that I think gets skipped a lot in a lot of the materials I've seen for churches and synagogues about fundraising, especially if the materials are very tachlis oriented, very pragmatically oriented towards very specific types of fundraising. So, um, who's in charge of fundraising in your congregation? The goal of this particular slideshow is to help you bring more clarity and ease to that question, so that fundraising feels more effective and more shared and maybe more joyful. Fundraising goes better when the leadership is clear, when people know who's doing what, goals get met, donors feel cared for, and the community feels proud. When it's not clear, burnout rises, volunteers get frustrated, and opportunities to fundraise slip through the cracks. So the work we're doing today is about how to set yourself up for success and for a healthier approach within your lay leadership and staff towards fundraising. Okay. There is a simple four-step process that you can use to clarify who's leading fundraising, and then use that information to develop an initial fundraising plan going forward. If you do have a fundraising committee, they should work through these steps. If you don't, gather a small group of leaders and volunteers who are already involved in fundraising in some way, and go through these four steps together. So, all right, let's dive into these four steps. Step one is describe current roles. You're going to write as full a description as you can of who is responsible for your current fundraising activities. And you're going to do this even if your congregation operates without anything even closely resembling a centralized fundraising plan. List everything: small religious school fundraisers, large gala events that you do every year or maybe every other year, any annual campaigns that you do. Name the people who ensure that each task gets done, even if their role is small or indirect. The goal is to capture everything going on that involves any kind of fundraising. Side note, I'm not talking about membership dues here, although I realize that in some congregations, there may be a close relationship between the way you do dues and the way that you do fundraising. And we can talk about that like in one-on-one consultation. These general principles should still be helpful, even if you don't completely fit within this rubric. All right. Step number two, now that you've described as best you can who does what, in great detail, now what you want to do is assess what's working and what isn't working. So you want to create a chart or a list of what your current approach does well and where it struggles. And try as you're doing this to look for things that people might overlook. Make a list of gaps and missed opportunities. You might discover, for instance, that members who've been asked about including the synagogue in their will have never been contacted after that one conversation. So, examples of things that oftentimes are working well in a lot of our congregations, that you're getting reliable revenue every year from a particular fundraising effort. You are on top of sending timely, heartfelt thank yous to donors. Examples of things that are often not working so well, or that we've heard tell of in this department from time to time: slow or forgotten thank yous, unclear contact people for members who have fundraising questions. They don't know who to get in touch with. Different fundraising projects going on that don't coordinate well with each other, and every so often there's some kind of drama. And then the last one is missed donor opportunities. Okay. Step one was describe who's doing what at the current moment. Step two was assess what's working and what isn't. Step three is identify improvements. Discuss what changes to your current approach could improve your success in various aspects of fundraising. We'll talk more about how to do this in a bit, but the main idea is for the small group that's doing these 4 steps together to spend time imagining things you could do to improve your overall practice of fundraising. Improve, not perfect. You can start with wide open brainstorming, but after a while, you want to narrow your suggestions for improvement down to things that are realistic and achievable in the near term. After you have spent some time coming up with ideas for improvement, then you want to recommend and monitor a plan. Let me explain what I mean by that. This small group is going to bring a clear plan to your board. It's going to name the people involved. It's going to outline their proposed responsibilities, and it's going to describe an organizing structure for how you go about doing fundraising, let's say in the year ahead. You want to have this plan include measurable goals for the coming year. So it's a good idea for the group that's doing this work to try to stay realistic and to try to hit the sweet spot between proposing a plan that is a true challenge, but one that is also clearly designed with very realistic goals in mind. All that this group is going to do is give that plan to your board, and of course, your rabbi and your executive director, like key staff people, are going to look at it too. It's a plan that the board gets to decide whether or not they approve. If they don't approve it, or if they send it back and say, could you do some more work on it, then the group should do that and come back at the board with something that the board thinks is maybe more doable. It's essential that the board approve of a plan like this if it's going to actually be implemented. And the board also needs to decide who will monitor progress and set a review date, 6 months or a year later, so that you can decide whether or not this worked, whether or not this made things any better, or you could make adjustments to it. This is a process, this group process, that you can scale up or down, okay? If you're not ready for a major shift in how you're doing fundraising, then this group can just focus on a few meaningful improvements. If you are ready for a big change, then this group can propose something that's broken into, a longer series of steps, and that maybe will take a year or longer to try to implement. So I want to go over these 4 steps again. Steps 1 and 2, describe current roles and assess what works and what doesn't. Step 1, describing current roles. The group is going to write a full description of who's responsible for your fundraising activities, even if your congregation operates without a central plan. They're going to list everything: small school fundraisers, annual campaigns. If there's a line on your membership form where people have the option to make an additional donation, who is the person who thought of having that be there? Who is the person who takes that data down and records it? And who is the person who makes sure those people get thanked? That is part of your fundraising strategy. So you want to name that too. Okay. Step 2 is you're assessing what works and what doesn't. So you're going to make a chart or a list of what your current approach does well and where it struggles. Look for the small successes that people might not think of, like a religious school director who always sends beautifully handwritten thank you notes. Then make a second list of gaps and missed opportunities. You might discover, for instance, that members who've asked about the possibility of donating some money for a special purpose, a very narrow special purpose, have shared that idea with a few different people after services, and they've just never been contacted. So that's worth noting, how it leads to the question of how that gap can be repaired. Here's some more examples of things that might be working well in your congregation, just to stir your imagination about what the purpose of this exercise is, right? There's good publicity and promotion of one of your annual fundraising campaigns. You feel real good about it. You've got designated contact people for your main fundraising campaigns, and they are known and liked by the congregation. You have got fundraisers going on that are genuinely fun for the community, right? Those would be great things to note are working well. Some of the things that you might discover aren't working well. Maybe the promotion of fundraising campaigns that you do is weak or inconsistent. Maybe there are ongoing communication snafus that are causing problems not only in fundraising, but maybe beyond, right? So for the sake of staying on schedule, I'm not going to right now invite you to share examples of things that might be going well or not going well. I am going to invite you to think about them within the confines of your minds. Okay, so to reinforce steps 3 and 4 in this 4-part process, identify improvements. Your small group that you've pulled together to go through this exercise should discuss what changes to your current approach could improve things. You have options. You could choose to establish a completely new model for fundraising leadership and recommend big steps to shift into it over a year or longer. Or you could decide to build on your current system, no matter how ad hoc it is. This is often the path smaller congregations will take because their informal structures are good at a number of things, but could be strengthened by addressing some specific gaps or counterproductive patterns. Important point as you are doing this work to identify improvements, this small group should include talking to your clergy and key staff as they work on this. Their roles, clergy and staff, often give them perspectives no one else has. So before recommending to your board, a proposal for who will lead different aspects of fundraising, ensure that you've got the buy-in of your clergy, your key staff, as well as your board. As you are contemplating possible improvements, consider some questions like, do you need to have clearer roles for certain people? Is there a need for more support from staff? Is there a need for a new volunteer? Who is going to report on fundraising progress? And when they do report on it, to whom are they reporting? How well are you going to use your various communication methods to promote your fundraising activities? Those are all things for this group to think about when they're considering how to improve things. Finally, step 4, bring a plan to the board that names specific people, sets some goals, offers some step-by-step instructions for how to get there, includes a date when you're going to review this and see how well it's working. Do not aim for perfection, aim for progress and clarity. Even a short, simple plan can make a big difference. Do be prepared to explain why you're proposing the plan you're proposing. If there are things that you thought about including but didn't, let the board know what those were and why. Ultimately, your board can modify a plan. Your job is to help them move things forward by giving them a starting point for action. Now, let's talk about different strategies you can use to implement constructive leadership change in fundraising at your congregation. Okay? So I'm going to present 3 models to you very briefly. Model number 1, take small steps. If your community's fundraising is mostly informal and ad hoc, you could start by recruiting just 1 or 2 volunteers to lead 1 or 2 specific projects with help from someone on staff, if possible. They should have clear, focused roles like lead the High Holy Days appeal and the legacy giving drive, rather than run fundraising. 1 or 2 modest initiatives can make a real impact. This could even be 1 or 2 one-off events that are not a ton of work to set up. 1 or 2 successes lifts morale and brings in more money. This small but scrappy approach identifies a few targeted improvements and new activities. If things go well, it can lay the groundwork for a larger committee coming into being and doing more ambitious things in the future. Okay, so that's one option. The second option is to add to your foundation. If your congregation already has some effective fundraising leadership structures, consider building on that foundation. 3 ways that you can do that. If a staff person does great work on certain annual fundraising projects, pairing them with 1 to 3 regular volunteers that they can train and collaborate with could amplify that staff person's impact and lighten their workload. Okay, one idea for how to add to your foundation. A second one, if volunteer leaders of different annual projects are burning out, if you're able to hire a part-time staffer or intern, they could give them meaningful support and help replenish the volunteer pool, right? So this is sort of the reverse, right? The previous idea was if there's a staff person hustling to do some fundraising, maybe bring on 1 to 3 volunteers. This flips that. If you've got volunteers who are burning out, but you might be able to swing having a very part-time staffer or an intern to help them and to also help replenish the volunteer pool for the tasks they're doing, that could be a very modest model for leadership change. One last idea for how to do this, add to your foundation approach. If your fundraising runs smoothly overall but has 1 or 2 persistent gaps, then recruiting a dedicated volunteer to fill those gaps, if they're well suited to the task, that this can really lift morale and boost donations. The overall idea is that you're taking what's working and strengthening it by adding 1 or 2, maybe 3 people into the mix who are then going to carry out a really clear set of tasks. Okay. The third model for leadership change is the most ambitious. Larger congregations especially need a reliable, creative, sustainable fundraising committee. Even smaller congregations can benefit from a committee. And let me tell you, a team of 3 committed, well-organized members can get the job done. A strong committee can keep an overview of all fundraising. It can assess current activities, it can suggest changes, and it can recruit both short-term helpers and new committee members. It's a good idea to have someone on your board who is an active liaison with your fundraising committee. In some cases, synagogues make this one of the responsibilities of the treasurer, but it doesn't need to be. Some congregations establish a separate board position focused solely on fundraising, like vice president for development, has a nice ring to it, in order to formalize an active direct connection between someone on the board and your fundraising committee. For help clarifying how your committee should relate to your board and staff and clergy, contact us in the Department for Thriving Communities. We'll sit with you and figure that out on a case-by-case basis. As we move towards time, I want to talk about staff roles in fundraising. If you have staff who do any kind of administrative work, chances are they're involved in some way in your fundraising activities, even if it's limited to writing publicity announcements for your campaigns or recording donations in QuickBooks or Razor's Edge or Zephy, or generating thank you letters. In many cases, staff play an even larger role. So let's consider 4 different fundraising staffing situations that are sometimes found in our congregations. One is some fundraising is included in your executive director or administrator's duties. That's one model we see a lot. Another one is some fundraising for a religious school is included in a religious school director's duties. A third model is a synagogue that actually has a part-time person on staff and their job is fundraising. We have a decent number of congregations that have someone fulfilling that role, or maybe they're fulfilling that and another role as part of a half-time or three-quarter time job. The last option for staffing and for staff roles in this is the rarest in our movement, and that is that you have a full-time development director on your staff. It has happened. It is happening in a couple of our congregations, but most of our congregations are not large enough and don't have a large enough budget to budget for this. The point here is there's no single formula for how best to involve your staff. In our movement, what matters most is that we help you evaluate how well your staffing is working as you go through those 4 steps that we talked about earlier. That the group you pull together to evaluate who's doing fundraising in your congregation and how well it's working, that they spend some time also evaluating how well staff roles are working. And to find out, to talk with people on staff, to hear their take on what's going well, what could be better, where they could use help. If fundraising is part of your executive director or office administrator's role or the religious school director's role, it's important to ask them where could they use help. And if you have chances to sign them up for training or support, try to give it to them. And for certain types of fundraising campaigns, they should totally dive into the relevant chapters of the fundraising guide as soon as they become available. If you do hire a staffer dedicated to doing fundraising, whether they're full or part-time, here's some quick advice. They should be focusing on building a volunteer base. Their job should include recruiting and organizing volunteers, supporting or helping to establish a fundraising committee if you don't have one. Avoid hiring someone who plans to just do all the work themselves. If you hire someone whose role is fundraising on your staff, prioritize people skills. I cannot overemphasize this. Only hire someone for this role who is mission aligned with your synagogue's mission. Hire someone who understands and believes in what you're all about. Set clear and really realistic goals with them. Define their role clearly. Make sure that their roles are well understood by the board and by any volunteers that work with them. When they succeed, publicize it. Give them a ton of credit. And finally, staff who work on fundraising need to have someone with greater authority that they can go to if they have difficulties working with lay people, or if they have questions about what they're expected to do in ambiguous situations. So don't hire someone if you don't have clarity around who they report to and who they can turn to if things are getting really difficult. Okay, we're nearly at the end. Question that I get probably 2 or 3 times a year. Um, some boards think, why don't we just do this ourselves? Um, and sometimes that can work for the board to lead fundraising on a single project. But for the board to lead fundraising as a ongoing responsibility instead of having a committee, this is usually a bad idea. It's also not very sustainable. Boards already have plenty on their plate, and people can burn out fast. It's so much better to have a committee that reports to the board, even if that committee only has 3 people on it. If your board wants to try leading your fundraising work, I would recommend that they just take on a single project and then see how that goes before making that a regular habit. So, to sum up, we've been learning about a 4-step process that you can have your finance committee or an ad hoc group of interested, diverse members work through in order to figure out who's in charge of fundraising and what leadership changes to recommend to your board. The group that does this work does not need to give the board a plan to overhaul everything at once. It's okay to aim for modest or very incremental improvement. The plan could start with recruiting 1 or 2 new volunteers and clarifying who they'll report to as they do some very specific tasks. If you do just that, you've moved from an informal system no one has really been tracking to a bit more clarity about leadership and a couple new volunteers lending their help. You could also end up recommending that the board pay for one staff training so that certain staff can ably be in charge of 1 or 2 new aspects of fundraising. Or you could create a short plan to ensure that different staff and volunteers know the fundraising areas they're in charge of, and you could establish a pattern in which they each give a brief report to the board twice a year. These are all just varied suggestions of what improvement might look like. Even small steps reduce chaos, introduce reliable lines of leadership, and boost morale. If you want to be even more concrete, your small group working on this topic could set goals for its own work for 30, 60, and 90 days. You could complete the first step, the one where you just describe all the current roles involved in fundraising, within the first 30 days. Within 60 days, your group could complete step 2, assessing what works and what doesn't. That would give them enough time to also ask people who are volunteering and are on staff how they feel things are working. Within 90 days, this group could make a list of potential improvements, maybe recruit a new volunteer, and bring a proposed plan of action to the board. And as I've just said, that plan of action could be aimed at major changes or at some very modest improvements. It does not have to be a complete fundraising makeover. The resources in this chapter of the fundraising guide include a worksheet and a sample set of descriptions for committees, and those are available to help you do this work. And of course, our team is available if you want a thought partner. So I really want to thank you for allowing me to sorry for a moment, for allowing me to kind of gallop through that second presentation. We have 6 sessions. I am only going to be trying to do 2 of these presentations, once more. For the other ones, we'll just have one presentation, one chapter. We'll get into some of these specific targeted areas for fundraising campaigning. And we'll have a lot more time, either for some breakouts or just for some Q&A. Tonight was kind of a let's get through some material. I will send you the 2 chapters as attachments. I'll send that out along with the information with the link to the recording, so that you can spend some time looking at basically the text version that goes with this. I'll send them as PDFs. They have embedded links to things like accompanying worksheets. At 9:29 Eastern Time, does anyone have a question or a comment? Maybe one or two people can chime in with the last word here. I see Stephanie. Is that a hand up? That is not a hand up. That is the hand that I could use to move your box to another place on the screen. How disappointing. Anyone else? Questions, comments, recipes, funny anecdotes, moments of inspiration?
I will just say, since you called my name,
Yes,
Stephanie,
Stephanie.
I thought this was really helpful. We're doing a lot of things well, but we're sort of in transition, and we've had some things happen lately. I felt like you helped, the presentation helped clarify, like, yeah, okay, these are the areas that we can work on, and here's some strategies that we can, use. And I think we do a really good job at, like, figuring things out. But it's so great to have a system to fall back on and be like, yeah, see, RJ says we should do it like this. So
Yes, our secret larger goal is a,
right,
a movement of automatons.
right. But here are some options, and it's always, I find that helpful. So yeah, I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca from Bet Shalom in New York. And I think that tonight was really helpful because it had me thinking about things that I've never actually thought about before, even when we talk about money and raising money and this item on the budget and this budget line, and really just to think more um, creatively, and also to understand that I don't know everything, and that is okay, and that there are people in our
Totally.
congregation that when we do this work that we'll definitely need to tap, and that we should tap, and that's really exciting.
I love it. I'm glad. I'm glad for the usefulness. All right, y'all, let's end on time. I really look forward to seeing you again. Stand by for the email or emails. It might be two, one with a link to the recording and the other with the relevant chapters of the guide. And by the end of the class, I will be sending you a link that is to a cloud folder that has all of the chapters of the drive of the guide, except one. Chapter 15, Capital Campaigns, not finished with it yet. Getting close. Thanks. Lila Tov, Erev Tov. A good night and blessings to all of you.